it's a bit of a change talking about Formula One again. I mean, I'm excited to do it. It's been a while. Hendrik and I is speaking about Formula One a lot last year. We're going to be picking up as well, but I'm also been speaking to you about Formula One. You live in the UK, I live in South Africa. Different angles, different approaches. Just briefly tell me your love for Formula One. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I grew up not really knowing much about Formula One until I was maybe 12. And I can remember I can remember me being turned on to Formula One very vividly. It was in 2008, and it just so happened to be the first round of the 2008 season. It was the Australian Grand Prix. So I must have been watching a replay because in UK time that's on at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So I must have been watching a replay, and on in those days it was on ITV, which in the UK is a commercial TV station. So they used to put adverts in the middle of the race. They would just put adverts in because it was expected, I guess, back then that nothing would happen during a Formula One Grand Prix. So I was watching it, and I remember I was building. I was a kid at the time, obviously, and I was building a Lego car on the sofa at the time. And I was watching this Grand Prix, and I think this 2008 Australian Grand Prix, I think something like five cars finished the race, five or six cars finished the race. There was huge crashes. I remember a Toyota got wrecked, like smashed into the wall, skidded across the track, and the British guy won. Lewis Hamilton won. And of course, I'm joining you on this adventure. I'm sure I'm going to be accused of British bias many times, which is fine. And so I thought, this is good. Lots of crashes, lots of excitement, and the British guy won. I'll tune into this again. And I did. And before long, I was that guy who gets up at um, 5 a.m. to watch free practice. I was doing that before too long. And after that, the Formula One went from ITV to BBC, which was a, is a this I don't it's not the state owned, but it's the public
Mm.
broadcast, I guess, if you like. So there's no commercials, and their coverage was really really great. And then that was straight into the 2009. So my first seasons watching Formula One were 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. Four of those five were all-time classic seasons, in my opinion. So that was pretty lucky. And then I obviously became a dyed in the wool, completely one-eyed, cannot be spoken to with any reason Lewis Hamilton super fan. So that's to get my biases out of the way early, is that that's the prism I'm looking through everything. I know some people support teams and some people support drivers. I support Lewis Hamilton. So uh, I have some Mercedes stash in the cupboard. That's not going to get worn again. I need to buy some Ferrari stash,
Mm.
but hopefully I'll be able to find some discount stuff because it's flipping expensive.
No, I hear you. Yeah, I'm a McLaren supporter, dyed in the wool, like you said. I've been watching it for close on 40 years now. I started watching when Niki Lauda was still driving. That gives you a pretty good idea also at school then. So I'm not really a driver supporter as much as I'm a team supporter. McLaren, all the years, yeah, wherever they went through, wherever driver was driving or winning or not
Hmm.
winning, I stuck to them. And it took a bit of time to win the constructors again. What was it, 26 years, 98 to
25 years. I
2010?
don't think people talking enough about how big of a deal it is, that because everyone's so obsessed with the drivers. But
True.
McLaren winning the constructors again after 98 was the last one
98,
that
yeah.
you won.
Yeah.
Um, that that was such a big deal. And you consider where you were 10 years ago. Like the
Yeah.
story when Lewis left was that Lewis was leaving a top team and going to a midfield team. And now, like within 2 years of that happening, Lewis was at the best team and McLaren was arguably the worst team. And so I think what has been achieved at McLaren to get them back to winning the title is doesn't get spoken about enough, in my opinion.
But I think we should maybe talk about that a bit. If you think about it, I was 2018 when they were using the Renault engine, and there was one sponsor on it, Petrobras or something like that, and I don't think they paid any money. I mean, that car was just bare, orange and blue.
Yeah, yeah.
And who came along? Zach Brown, of all people, marketing guy selling advertising space. And you saw the article today about Claire Williams saying that when Williams signed Martini, Ferrari wrote him an angry letter. So you'll be watching the Martini racing in your rearview mirrors because the Ferrari will beat everybody, and they never did. But the reason I'm saying this is Zach Brown signed Martini to Williams. Interesting,
Wow.
and
That
because he
is
was
interesting.
that, yeah, when he
I
came
went to
along
the
and he
F1
turned McLaren around.
I went to the F1 exhibit here in the UK. It was in London, and they had uh, they had lots of videos. It was really good. I didn't have very high expectations for it. I thought it was going to be very like Drive to Survive, but in a
Mm.
in a museum. But it wasn't that. It was really nerdy actually. And they had a clip of Zach Brown talking about Bernie Ecclestone and about how apparently Zach had signed, I don't one of the watch brands. I want to say it was uh, Hugo, or I don't know watches, but it was one of the watches was uh, a sponsor of a Grand Prix, and something went wrong. Like Formula One messed up in some way or other, and Bernie Ecclestone rang Zach Brown up and said it was his fault. And he was just the marketing guy working for the watch manufacturer. And he was like, no, it's your fault. The Grand Prix's gone wrong. So,
No, that sounds like Bernie. And no, Zach
yeah,
didn't take that lying down, I would suppose. No.
no.
Anyway, so he turned around, he turned things around. And then, like you said, last year, for the first time in 26 years, McLaren won a Constructors' Championship. I had my hopes up for Lando. Oscar was a bit too far behind. And we talked about this briefly before we started talking, but let's talk about drivers firstly, because obviously the big news is Lewis has gone to Ferrari and Max has got a new teammate again, so you're going to also
Again.
be, trampled over and the like. So I wanted to ask you firstly, I talked about Lando, your top three drivers you think for this year, who are going to be the ones competing for the title? And don't say Lewis, just, instinctively think about
Okay. So Max Verstappen is going to be competing for the title. You would think that assuming McLaren managed to maintain some of that advantage. Now we're in the last year of a rules cycle. That tends to mean that there's not huge changes in the pecking order, unless, the FIA specifically changed the rules in order to hamper one team, which has happened multiple times in Formula One history. Um, so you would think that a McLaren driver would be up there. And then it's about a Ferrari. There should be a Ferrari driver because Ferrari weren't that far away from the
it.
constructors. And you might think that Charles Leclerc has I think, in my opinion, the best one lap speed in Formula One. I think he's the best qualifier in Formula One. I would back him to in the same car to get pole position over any other driver, including Lewis. But I still think he has something to prove as a multiple race winner over a season. Now, the stat that always gets thrown at Charles Leclerc is his inability to convert pole positions into race wins. But in my opinion, that's because of his overperforming in qualifying rather than him drastically underperforming in races. But he
Mm.
does still have something to prove as a, a season-long race winner, in my opinion. So that's where Lewis comes in, is that he knows how to do that. And I do think that Lewis is going to be re-energized by this Ferrari move. Lewis is a very emotional guy. In the history of Formula One, you look at guys who seem to be robots like Schumacher, Verstappen now, Vettel to an extent. These guys seemed like they were made of metal. Lewis isn't like that, and he never has. Never has been like that. He's never been a machine. Um, so I think the last few years in Mercedes have really had an emotional toll on him, and I think that did hamper his performance. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised over the course of a year that Lewis were able to outscore Charles Leclerc. But I think that there will be days, particularly in qualifying, that Lewis isn't able to get close to Charles. So, extremely long-winded way of answering your question. Top three drivers: Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and one of the McLaren drivers. But I maybe this is the point to discuss because I don't know which one.
That's a good point because when we were talking, we said Lando might not be that strong psychologically. He should have won more races last year, for example. Oscar is more of a typical Aussie, gung ho, not easily phased. If they start off well and Oscar can get an early advantage, he might just be, might become the leading driver there. McLaren is going to shoot themselves in the foot again, of course, because they don't know who to give preferential treatment to or who's going to get the team orders. And, at the end of the day, some other guy is going to come along and win it. But yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned, Lewis not being a robot and you said Max is one of those almost made of metal guys, metronomic, so good, no emotions. Is that true? And we just saw Max last year
But from a
driving people
pace
off the
point of
road, that's
yeah,
emotions.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I'm from a pace point of view. I think it was. I think it was Daniel Ricciardo who said that like in free practice, Max would go 10 out of 10 in free practice. And Daniel Ricciardo would be like, what is this guy's problem? Why is he doing this? Like, and I don't know this, but I perceive that sometimes in free practice, if Max Verstappen isn't top of the timesheets, he'll put on a set of softs and go out and set a time that is the fastest in free practice, just because he can't be not fastest. And Schumacher as well was another driver who kind of was willing to cross the line in the name of winning. Now,
Hmm.
you are right. Clearly, there is an emotional side of Max in that he refuses to lose, and he would rather win. Big word here. He would rather win without honor than not win.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of being metronomic, in terms of never not being 10 out of 10,
Yeah.
Max very rarely drops a stinker. In fact, I'm trying to think over his four championships, other than a pole position lap that went unfinished because he crashed or whatever halfway around it. Other than that, how many mistakes has he made? Whereas Lewis does make mistakes. That's the comparison that I'm making.
Yeah. Lewis makes mistakes. Max doesn't make mistakes. He does things on purpose. For example,
Yeah,
Austin last year,
exactly.
going wide and pushing Lando off the track there. That's quite deliberate, and that again goes to the coolness of his head. I mean, we're going to have a lot of Dutch supporters going, crazy on us here for being
Oh God,
anti-Max.
yeah.
I'm not anti-Max. I must be honest. You see, there's a little Red Bull model car there behind me. I'm also not a Red Bull supporter. My son is, just so people can understand it. I'm interested to hear that you say you think Lewis might beat Charles Leclerc over the course of the season. Charles is a golden boy at Ferrari. Got
True.
a Ferrari contract a year after he started at Sauber. And I think he's under-delivered, like you rightfully mentioned, lots of pole positions. But how many victories has he got? 8, I think. And it's not like the
Yeah.
Ferrari wasn't competitive. Last year, the Ferrari was very competitive and didn't have that lull when they did that sort of botched upgrade. Ferrari could have probably won the Constructors' Championship. They should have done better. And I think over the course of last year, and not necessarily about the points so much, but I think Sainz probably performed better for me more consistently than Leclerc did.
So,
So
so so that,
that's
that's a great
interesting.
way of that's a great way of framing the question. So, do you think that Carlos Sainz, do you think he's underrated or overrated?
Underrated.
You think so?
Mm,
See, I flip-flop on Carlos Sainz. Sometimes I think like, no, this guy's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And then other days I'm like, he's never gonna be, he's never gonna be one of the top guys. He's never gonna be a championship contender, no matter what car he's
mm,
given. He's always going to be the guy who gets beat by his teammate over a season. But yeah, the reason I asked that is because that lets us measure Charles Leclerc of
mm,
it, because Carlos did beat Charles like reasonably often over their tenure as teammates. So if you think that Carlos is kind of in the great scheme of Formula One drivers, 7 out of 10 on his best day,
mm.
that means that Charles Leclerc on some days drops below that level. So that's just an interesting framing of that question for me.
Well, it's a good time to bring up Carlos Sainz now going to Williams. And the difference going to Williams, who's a bad team in the sense of compared to Ferrari or McLaren. I mean, not a bad team. I'm actually quite excited about them for this year, but he's the sort of the star pupil there, the head boy now. Alex Albon is taking all the kudos and credits, but he's going to be moved to the back, to the background a little bit. And Carlos is a star now. He saw new sponsors being signed. He brought Santander over from Ferrari. He brought the beer brand over, Estrella Galicia, whatever they call over.
Mm.
Big now sponsorship announced today. Atlassian is there, a big title sponsor, first time in 5 years. And I tell you what, a lot of that's got to do with Carlos Sainz. Now, this is what I'm getting at. Carlos Sainz being the lead driver. The guy can say, I want this car to be set up in this way. That suits my driving style. I'm sure that Ian Leclerc wasn't exactly the same. We know how people struggle with the way Max likes a car. Very pointy, loose at the rear, and it's almost like a go-kart, not a TV game.
Mm.
People complain about that. That's why they can't get used to that. If Carlos Sainz gets given a proper chance and he gets lead billing, I'm very interested to see what he's capable of. I'm telling you, in that sense, he's underrated. He's always have, like I said, Charlotte is the head boy, the star pupil. Everybody's the golden boy. Everybody looks at him, and Carlos sort of just has to live in his shadow. For all the bad things that happened because of Lewis going to Ferrari, and Sainz having to work there for a year or drive there for a year, knowing that he's lost his job. Good thing is he's going to be able to come into his own right. I think so. I think that's what we're going to see at Williams. Yeah, maybe not winning races, not definitely not winning races, but in a car that's typically towards the back of the field, you're going to see some exceptional performances from a guy like Carlos Sainz specifically. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting matchup, isn't it? I think Alex Albon has been benefiting from being a big fish in a small pond. And I think there's a question to be asked about the quality of some of the drivers at the back of the grid. The prime example of that would be like Nikita Mazepin was half a second to a second a lap slower than Mick Schumacher. And then I can't remember whether it was Hulkenberg or Kevin Magnussen came in next to Mick Schumacher and was at half a second to a second faster than him.
Mhm.
So obviously, with when it was Logan Sargent and people like that next to Alex Albon, he walked all over them. But now he's got someone who's proven what's that gap going to be like. Because if you remember Carlos Sainz, going back to the point of maybe he's underrated, his kind of clan, and obviously his Carlos Sainz Senior, his dad, they were able to stand up to Max and Jos Verstappen in Toro Rosso, as was. So they're clearly able to hold their own and fight for power in a team. So maybe, yeah, maybe I can see Alex Albon. Maybe his reputation is lessened by having Carlos Sainz as a teammate.
I definitely think so. I wanted to ask you another team. I think the team that's under the most pressure this year is going to be Aston Martin. All the
Great
money they're
shout.
throwing into this thing, getting Adrian Newey on board, giving him shares, that new factory, signing up with Honda next year. So much riding on this, offering Max $1 billion, whatever, to come drive for them. It's ridiculous. And yet they seem to stick with Lance Stroll. This is a favorite bugbear of mine. I can understand Alonso is getting a bit on in years, might not be as good as he was, but he's still pretty damn good. What is Lance Stroll doing? If you're really serious about winning a title, winning a race for that matter, you have to make the
Yeah,
call, even if it's your son.
absolutely. When I was just reminding myself about Formula One in preparation for recording this, I had a quick look at the grids to familiarize
Hmm.
myself with the new names. And I was scrolling down, I was like, what? Lance Stroll is still here. And you have to remember, like, when did he debut? Was it 2018?
2018, yeah.
And he's had good days, like his pole position in Turkey. He's had a couple of podiums in Baku and things. Arguably, the race in Italy that Pierre Gasly won, Lance Stroll should have won that race. There's an argument there. But absolutely, what is he still doing in that team? He should not be on the grid anymore. He kind of checked out at the end of last year. Aston Martin, when you talk about the pressure on them, they really faded into obscurity last year. Was it was it at the beginning of last year or the year before that Alonso
Year before, 2023,
was
all the
fighting Hamilton
podiums.
for the podiums, and they were saying
Mhm.
second fastest car on the grid and things. God, that didn't last very long, did it? And you're right, the money that's being thrown into it, the recruitment that they've been doing, taking people off Red Bull and Mercedes, and Alonso, is ready to throw his toys out the pram at a moment's notice. There's pressure. You're absolutely right. Now, the one caveat to that is, like you said, they're signing up to Honda, and they brought in Adrian Newey. How much input will Adrian Newey have had on this year's car? Probably not that much.
No, very
And
likely.
if you were running Aston Martin, you would say, forget this year car, Adrian. Talk to us about 2026 with the new regs. So yes, absolutely, there's pressure on them, and they are starting to look a bit like a filler team. And I do absolutely agree with you that they need to reinvigorate themselves with replacing Lance Stroll. Basically, they need to do that in order to just get some energy back into themselves. Um, but having said all that, they might be having conversations behind closed doors of like 2025 is just a stepping stone really
Yeah,
for
that's
us.
true. Well, talking about that, we saw McLaren saying that they're going to have a radical car this year. Um,
Okay.
yeah, as Zach said, the MCL
Yeah, that just
39C.
reminds me of the L. Do you remember the L-shaped side pods in
Yeah,
2011?
yeah. So the point is apparently that they found some sort of some of the new technology that they're going to be using in 2026 that they can actually use in the 2025 car, which allows them to make it more radical. Ferrari apparently said the same thing. So I'm quite keen
Mm.
to see that. And I saw just today that Peter Promodro was announced to have extended his contract with McLaren, the aerodynamics chief. The guy who couldn't do anything right under James Key and Andreas Seidel. And when they left, he just sort of, dragged McLaren up with Andreas Stella, who I admire greatly. I think he's a fantastic team boss. So I'm excited to see what McLaren comes up with. I think they're going to be right up there. But then everybody's favorite team to hate or love, for that matter, Red Bull. I think you talk about pressure. They're also under pressure, not just because of the fact that they've won so many championships, and suddenly last year they were third. You saw today Gareth Berger saying that after Dieter Mateschitz died, the team sort of regressed under Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. It's sort of a lot of infighting. Jos Verstappen throwing his toys out of the cot, like you just mentioned. That team seems to be going backwards, paddling backwards at a rate of knots. I mean, they still won the championships last year, but they were not the fastest car by any stretch of the imagination. They made stupid decisions like keeping Sergio Perez on long after he should have been let go. They cost them the Constructors' Championship. I wonder if that team has got what it takes to still be a front running team, of whether they're going to just sort of fading away.
It's a great question, and it's absolutely one of the narratives of this year. The narrative around last year was that Max Verstappen ended up winning the championship in the fourth fastest car. Now, I don't think that's quite true. People who were there will remember the leads that he built up in the first few races. But it was stark, wasn't it? How it looked like a continuation of the previous 2 years and then suddenly dropped off. And, Formula One it loves nothing more than a conspiracy theory. I'm guilty of that as much as anybody else. So everyone was saying, well, what's happened? Something's changed. Is it that everybody else simultaneously got faster by the same amount, or has something happened to the Red Bull? Was there something that was maybe pushing the boundaries of legality? Which, let's be honest, Red Bull aren't shy of a controversy. In fact, you can set your watch by a Red Bull controversy. There's
Mm.
probably one due any day now. Um,
Yeah, either doing
so
them one themselves or accusing someone else of of doing that. Yeah.
yeah. So so yes, so where are they? What was the second half of last year just a wobble, or is this the beginning of the end for that team? Christian Horner has worked a miracle to still be in that job, and
True.
I think that has said a lot about the power that he wields within that team, especially with Mateschitz passing away. And I don't say he's lucky still being a job based on the job he's doing in that role. I mean, based on like I said, the bi-weekly scandals that seem to emanate from underneath him or including him in some cases. So yes, and there's another side story for Red Bull as well is will Max Verstappen still be racing for them in 2026? With, like you said, Aston Martin want him, I believe Mercedes also want him. And if Jos is pretty public with his war against Christian Horner, it's a question to be answered. So I really don't know what to expect from Red Bull this year. I really don't know.
You mentioned Mercedes chasing Max, and we saw Toto chasing Max for 7 months or something last year, and eventually settling for Kimi Antonelli, 17-year-old kid.
Yeah.
If you talk about gambles, there's a lot of rookies starting this year, but they're all in lesser teams. Bartoletta is at Sauber and Ajar is at RB, and that's not that much pressure. We'll talk about big pressure just now when we talk about Liam Lawson, but Kimi Antonelli for me is the guy that has to make it work. I don't think there's going to be any excuses. It's one thing to start at the back and work your way up. I mean, remember Alonso started at Minardi
Mm.
and he worked his way up, ending up to be a champion within a couple of years. Point is, he's good. It was good enough. He started a top team. Even if Mercedes is not the top team anymore, but they're going to be right up there, and you don't perform. I don't know. I'm not so sure about that gamble, honestly.
It's a big gamble, absolutely. And whenever a rookie gets brought into a top team, the comparisons to Hamilton in 2008 get made. And he's been obviously quick to downplay that, as you would, as any press officer would immediately tell you, no, 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 don't compare yourself to Lewis Hamilton. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are some people who think that Mercedes want Max Verstappen to replace George Russell rather than Kimi Antonelli. And I think it's going to be an interesting, again, another narrative of this season. And Kimi Antonelli, there's no draw, is there? There's either he is the chosen one and he is the wonder kid and he will go on to be this amazing star. I guess Charles Leclerc is the most recent driver who's actually achieved that, and he started at Sauber. So who is the last driver to come into a top team and perform? Is it Hamilton? Can't really think of any others.
Hamilton came in 2007 into McLaren with Alonso that
Yeah.
year. That was his rookie year.
But
Almost won a
2006
champ.
McLaren weren't competitive.
No,
So
2007.
Yeah, but
No,
that's what I'm
no,
saying that
they were
they
competitive.
no, in
Remember,
2006 McLaren didn't win a
no,
race.
no, but I mean, no, no, but they were very competitive. Remember, Alonso won 2005, 2000, he won the championship in Renault.
Yeah.
And then he went to McLaren because McLaren was the top team there.
Yeah.
And everybody was expecting Alonso to walk all over Hamilton, and he didn't.
Yeah.
And then he left McLaren after 2000, and went back to Renault in 2008. So McLaren
Yeah.
was the top team. And that was 2007. I watched that when Alonso blocked Hamilton in the pits in the Hungarian Grand Prix, for example, that all
Mm.
that infighting and stuff. That was quite ridiculous. And that's the thing. That's the kind of pressure you get by being in a top team. All these expectations, and that's the one thing. You're 17 years old or 18 or however old he is now. He didn't shoot the lights out in Formula Two, not by any stretch of imagination.
Yeah.
All the eyes are
Form
going to be on you. How's he going to emotionally cope with that kind of pressure? That to me is a big question mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Formula Two is a bit of a knife fight at the moment, isn't it? It's a bit
Yeah.
of a free for all. There's not really been someone who's totally dominant, who's come through it lately and gone, I must be a Formula One driver. Um, but the thing about Russell as well is with Antonelli is that in the last 2 seasons, 3 seasons, however long it's been since he's been a partner with Hamilton, even if Mercedes finished ninth and 10th, so long as Russell was ninth, he could say, well, I beat Lewis. That was
Mm.
there. Now, if he finishes ninth and he just beats Kimi, um, that doesn't feel like the same achievement, does it? So they call him PR 63. Uh,
PR.
yeah. So they so it will be interesting to see how that goes. But the one thing that is in Kimi Antonelli's favor is his name. That's a very good Formula One driver name.
Kimi, yeah, because he
Yeah.
was named after Kimi
Yeah.
Räikkönen. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, talking about the rookies now. We mentioned Antonelli now. The one guy I feel dreadfully sorry for is Mick Doohan. Not Mick Doohan,
Jack
Jack
Doohan.
Doohan. Mick Doohan is his dad. I keep mixing the two up. That poor guy just got awarded this contract. He drove one race last year. They let Esteban Ocon go early. He did well. And then what happened? There's all these rumors about Franco Colapinto replacing him, and it looks like there's sort of dealings going on behind the scenes to actually get him out of there. I mean, talk about him only having 6 races in this season, or maybe getting let go earlier. I mean, that can't be good for anybody's state of mind and being competitive. Always, I mean, it's always unsure whether you have what it takes. But the point is, when you feel like you're being, knifed to the back, that's a different angle, isn't
Absolutely. What is going on with Alpine these days? Are they
it?
even still called Alpine? I
Yes, they
mean,
are.
the Renault group, or whatever part of larger conglomerate they are now, they have the most on-off relationship with Formula One. As soon as they're like not in it, all the rumors are going, oh, they want to get back in. They want to get back in. They want to buy a team. And then as soon as they're back in it, they seem to be looking for ways out and to cut costs and to do it on a budget. And to them, withdrawing as an engine supplier is an absolute farce. Alpine Mercedes, as they're going to be. That obviously that engine was a disaster. I remember I was in university, um, the first year of the hybrid era, and I remember people like hearing rumors even there at university in the UK, like this Renault engine is apparently terrible.
Mm.
That was in that level of community, um, and that it's just been we keep hearing about these 5-year plans, and then 5 months later, the team principal is sacked. It's just they're starting to feel like filler, aren't they? They're like a sideshow.
Mm. Listen, Flavio Briatore is there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to sell that team. Telling you now. Um, Cutting costs, getting rid of the engine program, getting a driver in that's got more sponsors like Franco Colapinto that can pay more of the bills, cutting costs everywhere, even in England, in Enstone. That team is being sort of, the feathers are being fluffed to sell it. Because the guy running it now is, what's his name, Oaks. He used to be the guy running MyTech, who's the other team who now applied to be allowed into Formula One. Remember, with Andretti.
Mm,
And they were both kicked out, but Hightech also went very far in that process. So Andretti eventually got allowed to enter Formula One now. And Hightech, the guy who used to run Hightech, now runs Alpine. The team is being fluffed. Don't be surprised if it's called Hightech pretty soon, and it's
2 and 2.
they wash their hands of it. Corporate guys.
Yeah, wouldn't be
That's
surprised.
yeah. Right, and then who's left now that we haven't spoken about? The stragglers. I mean, Haas did very well last year. Alpine sort of caught everybody by surprise by doing so well in that Brazilian Grand Prix of the Rain, and they ended, what,
Mm.
fifth, sixth around there. Where do you expect the stragglers to be? Who's going to be last? Where do you expect Williams to be with all the hype surrounding them at the moment?
Yeah. Like I said, with it being the last year of the regulations, you would expect some teams to just bin this year. Do you remember in 2021, Haas um, completely wrote off 2021 and they were driving around at the back, embarrassing themselves for a year? It's going to be between Haas, Sauber, and Williams for me at the back. Now, Williams did manage to get some respectability into the performances, if not the points tally. I'm trying to get up last year's
Hmm.
standings.
They were ninth.
Um, Ninth, yeah. Um, so it's going to be one of those three for me, unfortunately.
I think Sauber right at the
It's-
back. I
So
think
again,
hmm.
Sauber are starting to feel a bit like filler. I mean, RB, they're also a bit of a filler team, aren't they? I
Well,
mean,
there's no RB
they're
anymore. It's now Racing Bulls.
oh racing. That's what RB stood for, wasn't it?
I know that wasn't official. Now it's Racing Bulls. It's
Oh,
not D Corp or
okay.
RB. It's now Racing Bulls this
Yeah, but
year. We'll see what
they're
it's next
not
year.
they're not affiliated with Red Bull Racing in any way. Obviously, just because they're owned by the same company and have the same name doesn't mean that it's the same team at all. Um, but yeah, Sauber is the one because is the Audi thing still on? Because
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
since
yeah.
that happened, it's felt like that
Audi
it's been waiting
sold
to
30% to
moment.
the Qatar investment company
Hmm.
to get some money back into it. They completed the purchase sooner than expected. They were going to buy it out in 25% increase increments. And they bought it out
Hmm.
already 100% and then sold 30% onto this investment fund to get some capital back into it. They've got Matteo Binotto there. He used to run Ferrari. He's now the team manager. You've got Jonathan Wheatley coming over from Red Bull. He's been released to leave Red Bull earlier to run the day-to-day operations at the track. I don't know. They're going to be that bad. I mean, a car that ugly a color scheme can't be fast. If a car looks fast, it is fast. That car looks terrible. But next year is the Audi. It's officially next year from as of next year. And I see they're also opening a new facility in England now as well, which is a
Oh,
problem. Now you have a facility in Switzerland. You have one in Germany that builds the engine. You've got another one in England. That's typically not a recipe for success. Ask Renault or
yeah.
Alpine for that matter. So I don't think they're going to be as bad as
So
they
yeah,
were last year. They only scored points once, I think, if I remember correctly. But they're still going to be at the back. I think Williams are going to do well. I think they're probably going to be eighth or seventh, better than before. They actually finished the car earlier this year. They went off the spreadsheets now. They probably have a decent software system now. Did you see that?
yeah, that was
So
funny.
I'm excited about Williams. I think they're going to do well. I think RB is going to be, well, you call it fillers. RB and Haas are
Mm.
going to be chasing each other there or thereabouts. Alpine, that little bit of a flash in the pan towards the end might not happen again. The nice thing about Alpine, which is important to me, is don't know if you remember, McLaren recruited David Sanchez from Ferrari. And he pitched up at McLaren with now this new structure. They had Rob Marshall there that they took from Red Bull, which is probably one of the drivers behind McLaren doing so well. And they had Peter Promodoro that I talked about, the aerodynamics chief, and then they had David Sanchez. And David Sanchez left after 3 months, and he went to Alpine. He's now the director of, he's now the technical director at Alpine. And that uptick in Alpine's performance is David Sanchez. So maybe we shouldn't write him off too soon.
Maybe not. Maybe not. I like it. Like I said, with the teams that are at the back, the ones that RB probably might end up being the slowest based on. I don't. I don't know. It's very hard to say. I'm trying to formulate a proper answer for you,
Mm.
but there's lots of incentives for teams to kind of phone it in this year because it's the last year of the
Yeah,
regulations,
you're
and
right.
it's just what happens. So, but once you get that, the thing with that is, if you thought you were going to phone it in and then you found out that actually there's two or three teams that are slower than you that you didn't expect, you're suddenly going, oh, well, maybe we should try this year. So it
Mm.
might be that one team kind of springs forth, and that could be Williams. Probably, I would say that Williams feel like they're on the best path for 2025. I don't know if you agree with
Mm.
that,
Mm-mm.
but it's
No.
difficult to say.
They
You
were
know,
they said they were going to tread water in 2025, but they obviously did more than they planned to. So the car's going to be better than we expect, but not as good as we want it to be. Let's call it
yeah,
like that.
you don't see any of that bottom five breaking into the top five,
Mm-mm,
do you?
not even remotely. Very interesting thing talking about the top three now that I wanted to talk to you about earlier, just a little bit. McLaren ended first, Ferrari ended second, Red Bull ended third. That means until the end of June, the wind tunnel times have changed. And Red Bull's now got 120 hours more wind tunnel time than McLaren does. So let's say you have the cars equal. So you have the same time. So Red Bull spends the same time amount of time on for this year's car that McLaren does. That gives them 120 extra hours to focus on next year's car, which sets them up in a very to be very good next year. It gives them a bit of an advantage. Ferrari's got 60 hours more than McLaren does, if I remember correctly. So this budget cap thing is also something to consider because when the new regulation started in 2022, there was a bit of a budget cap, but in 2024, 2014, when the engines changed, which is now also going to happen in 2026, the engines are going to change. There wasn't a
Hmm.
budget cap. So it's going to be very interesting to see who starts out next year as the champions. You mentioned Renault earlier. I mean, Red Bull dominated 2010, 11, 12, and 13 with Renault. So come 2014 with the new engines, Renault were just nowhere, and Red Bull just fell by the wayside for many years until they got into bed with Honda. So lots to look forward to next year.
100%. And yeah, with the top three teams. It's funny with you mentioned the aero time because until kind of the middle of last year, we didn't really have any evidence that it was actually doing anything, did we? Because Red Bull had won the constructors and on top of that, they had a penalty which reduced the aero time for breaking the salary cap.
Yeah.
And yet they were still turning up every year with the fastest car. And they talk, was that a baked in advantage because there wasn't that much
Mhm.
change in the regulations from year
One
to
word,
year.
two words, sorry. Adrian Newey.
Yeah. There is that. But
Yeah.
really, the McLaren coming good is really the first evidence that we've had that this aero cap thing has any effect at all. So it will be interesting. And like I said, the carryover from last year to this year is pretty much the same, give or take, isn't it? So
Mm. Yeah. But, well, they said the Ferrari, the SF75 or something they're calling it this year, 99% of the cars new. So that's interesting. Very
really.
exciting. Yeah. Listen, we
Yeah,
have to cut
but
this a bit.
you can
Yeah.
calculate that off different. How do they work that
You're
out?
in the motor industry, aren't you? You should know.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, like
How is
if
that
there's a
possible?
slight form change in the side pod is in terms of length, how much is the side pod of the car? 60%? If there's a slight form change in that, it's only one panel, so therefore they change that panel there, 60% of the car's new. There you go. Like
So, I mean, they take the volume out. This takes so much volume.
yeah,
So it's that,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, you. That's very interesting. It's a good way to look at it. Now, let's cut to the chase here. Give me your constructors champion and give me your drivers champion. Who do you think is going to be?
Oh, the temptation to just let my bias just speak for me here.
I'm tempting you. I'm throwing the hook out
I
there and I'm
know, I
reeling you in
know, I
slowly.
know, I know. Oh, I want Lewis Hamilton to win in a Ferrari more than I've wanted any sports result for a long time. The the kind of hugeness of this move. Like I thought it was huge when we found out about it a year ago. I don't know if you've been on Formula One social media since the 1st of January. It's all anybody has spoken about. I've never known anything like it. I've never known anything like it. There's a Formula One community on Blue Sky, right?
Mm.
And I went on it like the day that he went to Ferrari for his photo shoots. It was just that same photo. For no matter how much you kept scrolling, everyone was posting exactly the same thing. It's even exceeded my expectations and how much of a big deal it seems to be. And so it it would be I can't have it not work out. Now, it can work out in 2026, especially when they change the formula to be smaller cars. Lewis has spoken very openly about how he doesn't like these big cars with the ground effect. He hates
Mm.
driving them. But the Lewis Hamilton Charles Leclerc combo is so much stronger than any other driver combo on the grid, in my opinion, right now. Really, McLaren is probably the second best, and that's with a cumulative how many wins between them, whereas Lewis and Charles are going to have obviously over 100, just Lewis on his own. And then you throw in the pole positions. Lando and Oscar haven't got the career statistics to back that up. So that
Mm.
could make a really, really, really huge difference. It's boring to say that McLaren are the favourites because they're the holders. You could expect Red Bull to charge back because, well, they haven't got the Adrian Newey thing anymore, I suppose. And then Ferrari seem to have the energy about them. So, constructors champions, you very rarely see a constructor win a one-off. So I'm going to say McLaren.
Mm. That's a good point. Bit of momentum, but if they're going to go radical in the
I think
design,
I
like I said,
worked
yeah.
out a
Mm.
couple of years ago that there's only like half a dozen times in F1 history that a constructor has won the title less than two times in a row, as in only won it as a one-off. Normally, a constructor wins it at
Mm.
least two in a row.
The most obvious exception to that is Braun, because they only existed for 1 year. Remember?
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. I think McLaren's going to do it. On your point about Lewis Leclerc being a better combination than Norris and Piastri, I think you have to also, it's a bit relative. Lewis is towards the end of his career. A guy like Oscar, I think, might be faster than Norris, but he doesn't have that experience yet. He made a couple of inexperienced mistakes last year, if you know where I'm
Hmm.
going. Little stupid mistakes that he wouldn't make in a year or two when he's more experienced. So I think in that sense, I think in terms of speed, I think McLaren's probably still better driver combination. I think Lewis is not as fast as we think he is anymore. And what I'm worried about for Lewis is the fact that he's going to try so hard to prove himself that he ends up, making a stuff up of it. You're going off the track too much, or making too many mistakes by pushing too hard. And then you've got Charles Leclerc, who's a very good driver, make no mistake. Again, like I said, the golden boy, and you have to measure up to him. You're a new guy in a new team. The whole world's attention is on you all the time. You said that picture was the most shared Formula One social media post in history, if I remember correctly, six
Yep.
point something. That's pressure. That's big pressure. Even if you're so experienced and you've got all this talent, and you are 40 years old. Make no mistake. If you're 40, you're not the same as 22, reaction wise and the likes. I'm not so sure about. I'm going to go. McLaren's going to win the constructors, and I think Lando's going to win the driver's title. I think Red Bull will probably end up second. I think Ferrari are going to flatter to deceive. Geez, that's a big statement. But yeah, we'll see.
If on Lando, I want to see Lando do something unpopular. I want to see him upset people because at the moment he just seems happy to be Mr. Popular and finish second. That's my issue with Lando. He
Mm.
seems okay with finishing second. Is my
He
so
needs a bit of
I
a killer instinct. Yeah.
I I think he's more of a Jensen Button than a
Mm.
Sebastian Vettel. I would or pick your comparison,
Yeah,
whichever
yeah.
one you like.
Mm.
But I want to see no more Mr. Nice Guy from Lando. Then I'll believe.
I think that's the thing with Oscar. I don't think Oscar is Mr. Nice Guy. He's a very friendly guy. But when
Hmm.
push comes to shove, he's going to do it. We talked about Liam Lawson not being a nice guy. Remember him showing the finger to Sergio Perez last year. I'm very, very interested, just in closing, to see how he measures up to Max Verstappen. Apparently, they like the same kind of car setup, pointy
Okay.
front end, which is a good thing. This is like all the other drivers, Gasly and Albon and all those guys who didn't want the same type of setup that Max likes. So obviously they're going towards what Max prefers. Liam likes the same kind of car. Liam's not a walkover or a pushover. That's going to be the one that's going to, in the bigger scheme of things, everybody's eyes going to be on that. How well is he going to do? What do you think?
I'm kind of excited for in 20 years' time when we finally find out the truth. Was Max Verstappen just that much faster than every single one of his teammates that he completely destroyed them, or was there something else going on? That because it's unprecedented what has happened with the Max Verstappen teammates ever since Ricardo was ousted, basically at Red Bull. What's happened with the drivers since then? Now, you'd say that the fact that it keeps happening suggests that maybe Max really is that good, but Red Bull keeps sacking the guy that gets beat. So that suggests that they don't think it's as black and white as Max is just that good. That suggests they think something is wrong with these other drivers. So there's a lot of pressure on Liam Lawson. It's so weird the way that it worked out with him. Of everybody said that he should have got the Racing Bulls or whatever they were called at the time, AlphaTauri seat ahead of Daniel Ricciardo, but then they didn't. And then people said he should have been promoted ahead of him sooner than he was. And then 6 months after getting into that seat, he's in the Red Bull senior seat.
Mm.
And it's such muddled thinking from Red Bull. There's no strategy there at all. But the talk about going into the lion's den. Talk about going into the lion's
Well,
den.
from what I understand, the strategy is the fact that he likes the same setup as Max, which is a big thing. It's a big thing.
But
So
that's
the
what you would
yeah.
say, isn't it?
Mhm.
That's what you would say if you were going in there. You wouldn't
Yeah,
say,
sure.
I mean, because if the narrative is that there's this setup that only Max can drive, um, you wouldn't go in there and say, oh, I don't like driving the same car as Max, because you're essentially saying, well, you're going to lose then, aren't you? Um,
No, but remember they tested Tsunoda and they tested Lawson and they made the call. Why
hmm,
didn't they go for Tsunoda, who's got more experience, is quite a fast driver himself, a little bit erratic, emotional, but a very
hmm.
fast driver compared to Lawson, like you just said, has been in and out, replacing Ricardo when he broke his hand, out again, come back again. They made a choice based on what those two guys can bring to the team. And I think the thing is that Lawson just I want to see what he does in a car that is similar to what Max likes, because that means you can develop fast. You don't have to have two different car setups, and you can have both cars score points all the time. So Sergio couldn't manage the same car. Albon couldn't handle it. Um, Gasly couldn't handle it. That I think that's the thinking behind it, and we will have to see. And it's not just whether you like the same car or not. It's whether you can stand up to Max psychologically. If not that Max can do anything to you, but just the fact that I keep losing. How can I not beat this guy? Or how can he be that much faster than I am? That's the kind of thing that you have to deal
And
with.
again, getting into conspiracy theories, if he does get a bit too close to Max,
What's going to
might he
happen?
suddenly find that his car is not as fast as it used to be?
Hmm. No, I don't think so. I don't believe in those things. I,
Oh,
I
that's what makes it fun.
yeah, I agree. I agree, but I'm careful of saying those things. We'll see how that goes. All right, you. Thanks, man. That was lekker. It's first time we're going to do this. We're going to do it again. Appreciate it, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.